Nobody else set? Okay. It's now 1:05 on January 3rd, 2023. As the chair of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board, I will call the meeting to order. So introductions, my name is Gary Merchant. I'm the chair of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. I'm also a state legislator, and to my right, around the table.
Dr. Bill Marsh, I'm an alternate.
Senator Cindy Rosenwald, alternate.
Dr. Tom Sherman, I'm a member.
Bob Woodard, alternate.
Todd Fahey, I'm a member.
Representative Murphy, I'm a member.
Thank you. So we have established a quorum. In regards to the agenda, is there anything people would like to add to the agenda, delete from the agenda, modify? I'd like to add one thing I forgot to add was scheduling meetings going forth for this year, whether to do them on a scheduled basis or do them at an ad hoc like we've done in the past. So I'd like to add that at the end before public comments is meetings.
It's already on there.
It's on there.
Well, somebody got it. Thank you.
Good job.
Good job, Nancy. So in that case, I don't need to add anything to the agenda. Okay, moving on to the minutes from November.
Can I go back and
Oh,
add
sure.
one thing?
Yeah,
to the
please.
agenda? Yes, I was wondering whether we should start work on the advisory council. Maybe that's already. I don't think so.
No, it's not. You want to put that after the scheduled meetings or before?
Yeah, it's just actually just a question.
Advisory council.
For the board.
Anything else? And I also want to we talked about having Dr. Woodward do a presentation this meeting, and it was subject to the agenda. And after looking through the agenda with what we have on it, I didn't think you'd have enough time to give you what you need in order to do an appropriate presentation. So you're off until next time.
One other thing.
Yeah.
Just an apology to Bob is that I did a thorough review of your report while on a plane and thought I'd sent it. And so I sent it at 12:37 today. So it was great.
I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
good job.
Sorry about the late response.
It was nice to have some actual data in the report as well towards the end of it, which was very
Yeah,
appreciated.
I just found one typo and one comment.
That's not bad.
So a review of the November minutes. They want to make a are they in here? There's something.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the ayes have it. So the other one,
One quick question
Yeah.
on the minutes. Sorry, I had some time, so. I
yes, and I see.
Don't usually have time, but in any case, the question on prior minutes, the website shows them all being draft. September, October, November. Is that just a matter of updating?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then also, I think on the website, that's one thing we probably should do for a future meeting is talking about the website itself. Because there are things on the website, I think we need to, the format of it is just have a just general discussion about how to make it user friendly as much as possible. Okay. On the MOU, Mr. Barry, would you like to come down and have a chair somewhere and
That's
where do you want to go right there? Would you like to talk?
When you.
I can move. How about I go right here?
Right there, that's fine.
Yes. So what you should have before you is a draft MOU between DHHS and Prescription Drug Affordability Board. I worked on this draft with your counsel at the AG's office, Sherry Phillips. This is essentially a very I guess standard form that we use when we have memos of understanding between various agencies. So I don't know if people had an opportunity to review it, if, how people want me to proceed through it. I don't want to bore everybody by just going through it and reading it verbatim. So I'm happy to proceed however you would like, Mr. Chair.
Well, I'll leave it to the members of the board if they have some comments or some questions for you. And this, I believe, is built off from the RSA 21 G10,
Yes.
which basically outlines the responsibility between parties when you have a board attached administratively to a agency.
That's correct.
I think in talking with Dr. Woodward, there was a typo somewhere.
Okay,
But I presume they've been corrected.
I don't think it had been, sir.
I have not looked at this in a few weeks. so
I saw a couple places where there's a couple commas on page 3.
Ken, right. 1.2. And an extra metal insertion. 10 PIN at the last line.
Oh,
So
don't know where that comes from. I came in there to figure out where that,
And then there's some sort of the-
and I assume this has been reviewed by the AG's office,
yes, this was worked on directly with the AG's office.
okay? And have the attorneys at the HHS reviewed it as well?
So we need to have, go through it with the commissioner at this point to have her
Okay.
sign off on it. So she has not seen this at this point. But this has been reviewed by, myself, the chief financial officer, the, director of contracts, an individual who's responsible for, privacy and security. Great for title, I think she's the chief privacy officer for title, Kathy Bernhardt. And those are the 3 that spring to mind so far.
Okay, one of the things I did in reviewing this, and I always get nervous about these, is on page 9. On 9 above it, item 9.
Mhm.
That's what they call an end user agreement.
Yep.
It's not attached.
It's,
Or is that something we have,
it actually is attached, but it's on,
or is it attached?
it's after page 13.
Page 13. Okay, thank you.
And then the one thing I did want to point out too, I'll mention weird formatting. Page 6, I was trying to get definition section to directly follow B. But I was not having much luck with my
Computer,
my word processing skills, so I will fix that before
Yeah.
it's ready to be formally signed. There's a hard page break between legal authority and definitions, and that's just a product of deletions and other things. So I'll work on correcting that space.
so in regards to the end user agreement, is that basically something that is not modifiable?
Well, if you have any modifications, I can take it to the privacy officer and see what she thinks. Or if you have general questions, I can also set up a meeting as well.
No, at least this one here is in a printed format. A lot of times you get into a computer and it just says, click here. You don't actually always read what you're clicking on. And then you find out afterwards you click on something you probably shouldn't have. So I don't have a lot of. Since it's gone through the AG's office, it's gone through yourself, and I think it's gonna go through the HHS legal department. I didn't see anything wrong with it. They're clearing it.
Take any questions from the public, Mr. Chair?
Sure, if you want to.
So,
Sure, ID first.
so I'm Representative Jess Edwards, Chair of Division 3 Finance. And so I'm looking at page 2, section 3, and it goes from 3.1 to 3.3. And what is not clear to me, and I'm just trying to understand exactly how this works. It is not clear to me from the way this is written that the budget of this board is a component of the DHHS budget, and therefore it goes through the legislative budget process or not. So the words that are written here in section 3 don't clarify to me where, if this budget is subject to the governor's budget review process and subsequent legislative approval. What is the intent? Did we want that to happen, or did we not want that to happen?
I believe Representative Edwards, when I go back and look at it, which I will do right now. On 20, the RSA that attaches the board to an administrative agency, it does outline a process for that.
It's really hard to hear you, Representative Merchant.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
let's see if I can get to it. Let's see. Find the RSA, if I can find the RSA. RSA 21G10 does have some reference to it in regards to a budget. Let's see if I can pull it up. 21G. Probably the thing to do is pull it up with the says here, the department to which an agency is administratively attached shall A, provide budgeting, record keeping, and related administrative and clerical assistance to the agency if mutually agreed to in writing, and provided the agency shall pay the department with cost allocation basis upon the services. So the agency's budget request as submitted and without changes to the department's budget.
okay, so the summary of that is that the budget for this board shall be part of the governor's budget request process and subject to review of the legislation. Is that a yes or a no? I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Yes.
Okay. Well, okay, thank you. I think I was here in November and asked a similar question, so I'm happy to hear that.
Yep.
Does the MOU need to specify that, or because it does the MOU and the financial services and budget area doesn't mention that particular RSA?
It says in accordance, if you look at number 3.3, says in accordance with 21G, so we have to follow 21G.
Okay, is that the RSA you just read?
Yeah.
Oh, man, my memory is fading really fast. Do we have anyone doing Alzheimer's in this group?
What was
They're in
that?
the other building.
Yeah, because that was one of the questions you raised.
Okay, and then if I may, one other related question. I don't see, Mr. Chair, any calculation or any obligation in the MOU for the board to actually transfer money to the department to reimburse for these services. I see an agreement that services will be provided, but I'm not seeing in the MOU where it says the board will reimburse for those services. Am I missing it, or is it not needed?
So on page 12, Representative Edwards,
Yes.
under number 8, reimbursement.
There is a page 12. Oh, what funds will we? Oh, okay. So that is, so this is a surprising shift in strategic policy, as I understand it. I understood that the board was always to compensate the department for the costs of supporting the board. I don't know where I got that, but this, I interpret this reimbursement section to say the board will not compensate the department for their expenses. So what is the intent of the board? To not compensate or to compensate?
It's to compensate the board, the Department of Health and Human Services.
So if I can clarify, Mr. Chairman, that the reimbursement part refers to part two, which is the data sharing agreement.
Okay,
And then the cost allocation component of this is in 2.1,
2.1.
which is on page 2.
Okay. I read that as the department agrees to provide these services. I don't see in section 2 that the board agrees to reimburse for those services. And once again, unless I'm just missing that.
Question for Mr. Barry. Wouldn't this be part of the department's budget? Like all of the 125 agencies are to the departments they're attached to?
That's my understanding. Now it's a question probably better suited to Mr. Nathan White, the CFO, but in talking with him, that's my understanding of it. Yes.
So it'd be part of the budget process.
It'll be part of the department's budget process.
But
The funding of the department is part of the budget process to include the requirement, their capability to support its MOU. I get that. The question I'm asking, Senator, is more specific. Given that the board is a revenue creator, any of those revenues to reimburse the department. I'm not seeing the board sending money to Department of Health and Human Services in this MOU.
so if I could, the way I would expect to see it in the budget would be other funds. So this board would be part of the HHS budget. But the fund, the source of funds would be other because it's these assessments and fees. And it's limited to 125% of its operating expenses, like, for example, the Board of Pharmacy is. So can't just say we're gonna charge you, $100,000 a year to sell your products in New Hampshire. It has to be limited to what the expenses of the boards are. And every 2 years, the legislature gets a chance to true up those expenses versus fees during the budget process. By saying, well, what are your expenses versus what are your revenues that you're bringing in with fees?
Yes, ma'am. I think I agree with everything you just said,
But
but I still don't think it answers the question. It implies the answer to the question, but it doesn't answer the question. Will the board ever transfer money to the department's account to reimburse for the services provided? I think the answer is no, but I thought the understanding was that the board should be compensating the department the reimbursement for their expenses. And I'll quit belaboring.
I mean,
was just
I
looking
guess the
for
way I
an answer.
understand it is, the board is part of the department's budget, but it pays for its expenses with other funds, so not general funds, not federal funds. But the source of funds would be other.
So is it your belief that if the department had an unusual legal expense, for example, related to providing support to the board, that unusual legal expense would be compensated by the board.
I think
Or
we
that it
would
would come
charge
out
to
of
the
general
board's
funds.
budget lines. I think,
Percentage abduction.
Don't we have precedent for this? This isn't the first time we've ever had
a 125.
a 125, right?
No, we have lots of.
We have lots of
So-
MOUs.
All the
How are
boards.
they? I agree completely with Representative that we should be clear who's paying for what.
Right.
And that needs to be clarified in here for me to be happy with what's here rather than implied. But what happens in all the other 125 arrangements is the board self-sustaining and therefore pays for everything, including services provided by the department, or is the board are the department provided services provided in the budget? Or are you saying that other funds means that it's coming from the board?
Other funds would be referring to like these assessments and fees. So
So-
it's not general funds,
So it's not general
not
funds.
general funds.
So essentially, the department is charging the board for
Correct.
the services.
Correct.
But that's not, I agree that that's not clear in here.
In the MOU.
Right.
So are you suggesting maybe adding 2.2 and put down the board shall be responsible for reimbursing on a cost-based allocation? These are things we're talking about that
Right.
just clearly state on the board shall.
With that.
I think that's exactly the point of clarification right there.
I'm not sure it would be
But
reimbursement. as
isn't
the
there a way,
budget.
but isn't there a way that we have precedent for this? Is there?
So I would speak with Nathan White on this for his point, because he helped me with this language. In general, and so if there's a point of clarification, I'll bring it back to him. I'm sure he can have something to say.
So the idea would be to have something that clarifies that however it's done, whether it's
That the board is paying.
that the
us
board is
way.
paying for it, that's not coming out of general fund, it's not coming.
Correct.
Is that your point?
Yes, sir, that would do it. I mean, and 2.2 just seems to be naturally a paragraph in an event. Because 2.1 says what the department agrees to do. 2.2 would be the companion to say, and the board agrees to reimburse.
Yeah, and then we follow the standard practice.
Yes, so
That's done.
the cost allocation process right now is complicated and requires some sort of history on it. Mr. White didn't get into the exact specifics of it with me, but he indicated it would need some time before you really know how to do that. You need some history of how the board is operating, so. But I'll talk to him about clarifying this, so it's clear.
Maybe he could come to our next meeting.
Yeah.
And
Very helpful.
explain what it looks like in the budget process.
That would be helpful.
Would that be helpful?
I couldn't hear the
Sorry.
conversation.
We invited Nathan White to the next meeting to explain
But
how this looks in the budget process.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
so, do you
The
take away?
next meeting is before the governor delivers his budget anyways, right? Before
Haven't said it yet. We will be.
February.
So if you take away, if you can, Attorney Barry, is 2.2, review with somebody to deal with the issue about being clear, the board is going to reimburse the Department of Human Services for the expenses agreed to in the MOU.
Yeah, I think I have some language in my head that will work
Okay.
pretty well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Any other comments at this point in time?
I just have a question.
Yeah.
As I recall, we'll be dealing with very sensitive information,
Yes,
potentially very sensitive information. So we talk about data breaches and such, and maybe some of the electeds can answer this question. What happens if there's some kind of data breach and the board is attached to this? I mean, are we insured for that? I mean, is there, because I'm not trying to create any problems with this, but I mean, I don't want to be held personally liable for disclosing proprietary secrets of the pharmaceutical industry. That would not be a good day. So is there anything, does the state have any insurance for such a thing? Is there any indemnification that would trigger coverage in the event that there was a data breach, given the times we live in with data breaches and such?
So
I didn't see anything in here.
it's not in there. There is a general catch-all RSA out there for individuals who are state employees acting on behalf of the state agency, if they're acting in the normal course of their business, that they are defended and indemnified pursuant to RSA 90D. Would that apply to you as board members? I don't know. I've not looked into that issue, and it's an issue I haven't really thought about, so I'm happy to do some more research on that.
Fine. You're a state employee, and so is.
So I will bring that back to individuals here as well as Attorney Phillips, PAG's office.
Thank you.
All good questions. Any more?
Is the correct word reimbursement of the board to the department, or is it more that they will be covering the costs of their activities through fees in assessments that are charged?
So that's a question for Nathan. In my head, I guess, in my
I'm just thinking
layman's term,
mechanically,
I
how does
kind of
that
think of
work?
it as reimbursement.
Right.
If that's not the proper term, we can change that.
Okay.
But that's more of a Nathan question I'll raise with him as well.
Just a common thought. The reimbursement means cost-based, and how you calculate the cost of something you mentioned needs to be looked into. Fees is another issue. I don't know whether the department has a set of fees that you charge us. So it's not just a semantic issue. It's the criteria by which our payments will be made.
And that's where I think it goes back to the cost allocation method, because that means something to the finance individuals here. It means less to an attorney who doesn't dabble in that. But getting back to your first point, we don't work off of an hourly, like you pay $15 per hour for this person's service or anything like that. It works much more, it's much more nuanced than that. And that's how the amount of reimbursement, I won't use reimbursement, the amount of transfer of funds is calculated.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Is there?
Comment on under the data sharing agreement.
Where are you now?
Of the MOU.
Yeah, what page?
Page 9. Section 4, so it mentions the parties agree that Medicaid prescription drug data provided by the department.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure if it was purposely included in the New Hampshire shares, but I think it might be wise to mention the entire New Hampshire shares that's not Medicaid data used. I think some of those data are included in the table. So just put that under the section of the data sharing agreement.
Thank you. Anything else in the audience? People? Right? No?
Can I raise
Yeah.
a weird question that
Sure.
comes off of your good question? We, in the medical field, of course, you can be sued for anything, whether you actually did something wrong or not, and I guess that's true in the entire world. But as a serving board member, no longer an employee of the state, what is the liability? There's significant penalties in here, criminal penalties, which I completely understand. But if the board is sued, can we get clarification over the protection for those of us serving as board members who are basically volunteers in the public?
It's what I normally think of when I serve on the board is B&O insurance.
Is what-
Board and officers. Basically at that point in time, if you want to serve on a board, any organization, they normally have insurance to protect you from that.
And that's what I'm just wondering
Like
about
an
this
hospital
one,
and
because
so forth,
unlike
yes.
so many other commissions where. There's not a lot of liability. This one
Have a lot.
has a lot of liability.
Correct.
So do we need to have board and officer insurance? And should that be one of our expenses for those who are not covered?
So I'm gonna speak to Attorney Phillips at the, at the AG's
Good point.
office on how other boards manage this.
Yeah.
Because it's a great question and something that we should, drill down to a bit more. So I'll make sure I raise this with her.
Thanks.
So we can add it to the,
Spot one,
yeah.
Attorney Barrow, you understand the details, right? Because I mean, there are very strict penalties in here, and I'm not sure really any other board will potentially have the exposure. Just
we
thinking
have.
aloud that we have.
Well, there are some pretty sensitive boards in the department, like,
Of the adverse.
adverse incidents and
But-
those kind of things, so.
That's for a trade secret of a
trade
pharmaceutical.
secret pharmaceutical.
they
I think it's the,
have pocket.
it's the magnitude, it's the magnitude of it. That's the question.
And, you know, Mr. Fahey, I absolutely understand the nuances here, which is probably something we hadn't really
Yeah.
considered, given other boards don't handle this much information that I'm at least aware of. So I'll make sure we handle that, because I understand your concern.
Is there other concerns or other questions? So I think you have a couple of takeaways. We're not ready to vote on this today. So if you want to address it with Attorney Phillips over to the AG's office, make sure we got it taken care of.
Well, Mr. White.
Sure, please.
While we're on the subject of risk, no liability. Would any potential exposure be for both the board and the advisory council?
That's a good
That's your
question.
point.
Now, what's interesting about the advisory council is a lot of them are state employees. So
So they're covered.
potentially,
Right.
you know, it's, I would think so, yes, but I'm not the AG's office. I can't make that determination, but there are non-state employees on the advisory
Correct, there are,
council.
exactly.
I think
There are appointees.
And I don't want, hopefully. That doesn't become a barrier for somebody serving on the board.
Right.
sure.
'Cause if you get big pharma coming at you, they'll be relentless.
I don't look good in orange.
Even was
It's not my
right,
color.
even though he was right. Yeah. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So at this point, are we all set on this one? And you have your takeaways?
Very clear takeaways.
All right. Right, move on to the next item on the agenda, the budget. Fun stuff. So I went through and I talked to different people and trying to figure out how to set the budget. So my thought is on the budget. As Senator Rosenwald said, we have 125% board. So we can't raise more revenue than 125% of our expenses. So the first thing I think to do is start with our expenses and then figure out what we need for revenue. Versus going the other way, if that makes sense. So on the expense side, what I did is I put a nice little chart, a little presentation to you folks here. And once we get through the discussion on the expense and we can get into the revenue side, is how to build the revenue side of the equation, because there's a couple of options for us. Even though we're going to have the ability to send out invoices probably sometime later this month. The challenge is going to be is that the invoices will start coming in the revenue before we probably incur a lot of expenses. So just keep that in mind as we build the expense side of the equation, is that the expenses are for a full year, not for 6 months, but the revenue will be broken into 6 months because it goes until the 1st of July, and then we do it annually thereafter. Okay. So on the expense side, it's not that difficult of a budget. Took a while to think it through, but it's not any moving parts to it. So on the expense side, clearly the biggest expense is going to be the executive director. That in itself, if you look at the pie chart on a piece of paper, the executive director, what I tried to do, I think someone referred to it before, is looking for the unicorn, and it's going to be difficult to figure out what to pay the unicorn if you can find the unicorn. So in saying that, I went back and looked at a couple of places to get their executive director, what their compensation looks like. And I was able to get a hold of Maryland to get their posting. I did go to Oregon, but they took it down. I'm trying to find out from a couple of people. Unfortunately, the holidays was difficult to get hold of people. But in the packet, there's also from Maryland is what they're paying, what they advertised at that point in time, the posting, what they were paying their executive director, and what the range was. And if you look at it, it's in the packet somewhere, I can find it. Yeah, that's the one. So in there, the range on the, on their slide was 113,000 to 152,000. So that was 2 years ago. Making the assumptions probably in some escalation. So I went back and said, okay, I'm plugging into it. And when I went back, this is total compensation including benefits. If you go back and look at in your packets, you'll see two packets. There's one here. It says Larry Glade, it says blank. And that came off from the state's website. What I did was, and this was working with Attorney Barry, is on the website, if you look at this piece of paper here, I'm trying to make it confuse, which is unclassified. So I say, okay, where would that dollar amount fall into an unclassified position? I get realized it's going to go through Joint Commission and Employee Compensation. So even though we have an estimate, it's going to be ultimately their call to where they're going to place it. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we can, for a budgetary point of view, have at least a target, but we probably won't have the actual number until they're done with it.
Correct.
Correct? Okay. So if you go back and look at where that compensation comes down to, what I honed in on was on level KK. And then step 4, which is $118,378 per year. That's how I got to it.
On the left side.
Okay, that's how I fundamentally said, okay, I need to take a start and go to the board. And that's pretty much where it came out.
Would that be enough for us to swipe the director from Maryland?
No. If you want to get to, if you want to get to Andy's position, you're probably going to have to go down to about QQ.
Does that include the benefit?
No. This is just the salary.
118 is.
And then on this one here, Sarker, is with a benefit package with it. So there's 4 pieces of paper to look at. One is what was down in Maryland, that one right there. Yep. I think it's that one.
Who I think I've got an extra.
Okay.
I mean,
So you should have 3 pieces of paper, Maryland's job posting, the unemployment or unclassified grid, and then how I calculated it in here.
The Maryland number is proposed
That was without before benefits.
before that.
Yes,
this one is for classified employees.
yes, but I had to use that as
Okay.
because it gives all the benefits, it does the calculation, and so I just used it as a. Okay. So basically, if you look at everything from benefits gets driven by the template. It's all, once you fill it all in, it takes care of your Medicare and retirement, all that stuff gets populated. So the benefit package is going to be 47,103. The total is 165,000. They rounded it up to 166,000. That's how the number came about. But again, I'll remind everybody, this is my best guess at it. It may come back from GCEC, higher or lower, and I don't know where they're gonna come. Do you have any?
I do. Well, I need to follow up with HR on that.
Yeah.
See where they're at.
So that's a start.
The good news is that once we're up and running, the health insurance costs will drop.
Correct. At least the dark part. So that's that good.
Just a question, relative to your comment about monies will be coming in hopefully by the end of January or soon. I imagine a lot of that fee will be eaten up quickly if we have an executive director. My question was the timing. Do you have a sense of the timing when we might have an executive director on board?
No, I would say at this point in time, it's gonna go through GCEC first before it gets and get graded. And once that happens, then we can post it. So I'd say at best guess, it's gonna be most likely no sooner than May, possibly June.
So the question would be, this would be a half for this year, then that number, is that
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Best guess,
Okay,
and that's being optimistic. Unless there's somebody in the state.
Really
coffers.
optimistic.
Yes.
Because
Unless
I've
it's
been
some,
on that committee.
Yeah.
It takes at least a year. Because they send it out to consultants.
So you're saying we won't have an executive director until a year from now?
If we're creating a position,
any way to speed that up? No,
I don't know, couldn't we just
they're gonna.
find an unfilled position in the department? I
Go
don't
Charlie
know.
well enough.
I do not know Charlie well enough, but sure, a call from you might help
No,
out.
The reason I ask is I feel like we've been doing this for 2 years and we just got the rules done and now we're gonna wait another year before we can functionally be operationally efficient.
Yeah.
And so that just seems a long time to me.
I mean, is it possible to hire somebody as a consultant to fill in? So what we're going through this process?
That's possible.
We've got consultant.
Yeah.
The other person I would talk to is Counselor Warmington. Since she represents Concord and see if she has any suggestions for expediting the process if we can't borrow a position.
Thank you. Because one of the other things we're looking for salary wise is going to be an administrative assistant, and I went back and looked at, again, job classifications based upon what I thought would be reasonable. And what I found in the job, and this is up to, again, we didn't want to hire somebody. We wanted the executive director to hire their own. So I did pull the job brief up.
Is that the Maryland version?
No, it's the one. You got it there? There, yeah, it's right there. So-
Top left.
Oh, that's for the
Yeah.
administrative assistant.
Yes.
This one here.
So I think that's sort of in the middle. It's a grade 16. And I don't know, Nancy, if that's, where am I?
Can you ask the question again?
Is that, is grade 16, is that gonna be something, you've done this for a while because you've been doing a lot of it?
Are you asking if I think that's a fair?
Yes,
I think that an AA2 would be more appropriate.
two,
It would be a 19.
grade 19,
Mhm.
more appropriate.
Like, um,
No, you've
Is
been doing
that
it.
more requirement, more expertise? This person's gonna be pretty independent.
mhm.
Yes,
Yes,
so if we do that, then if you go into the pay scale, which is on there somewhere. One here, the hourly wage.
Yeah.
We look at number, you said 19?
Yeah.
So this is a classified position.
Yes. So it goes back into already, these already, so if you go to a 19. And you go to is it step 4, is that reasonable for you?
when I first started with the board, that's what I was at.
Okay, so if you go to a step 4, it'd be 45,883 versus 40,000. But it will be
I just think
independent
You'd have a real qualified candidate.
candidate, yeah. Other thoughts? And I'd rather,
There's some questions on the job description, but I don't know if that's isn't the right time for this.
the job description, you can, sure, shoot.
Well,
Guys, the job description, this one here is for a 1.
right,
It's
so I
right, so, yeah.
suspect this is gonna change, but I just had a question about supervision.
Yeah.
On that first page. You can, at this point, we're only looking at really 2 employees, right? Where
Mhm.
It's gonna be the executive director and the AA. So I don't see where in here this talks about who they report to. Is that, am I missing that?
Mr. Chairman, I can answer that.
Please.
So what you're looking at is a class specification, that's a general idea of the job duties of that specific class. There'd be an SJD, a supplemental job description that would accompany that position once we have more specifics.
That would answer all my other questions. You're good.
Yeah, the other thing here, and I don't know whether to weave this in somehow. And it's kind of because. A lot of what they're doing is gonna be data related. So this is more into maybe a different skill set, but if we're looking for somebody who's gonna have the ability to work in data, spreadsheets and so forth, and et cetera, is it administrative two gonna get us to that point?
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to get to. Because
Can you specify under recommended work traits, proficiency with? What would be Excel, or probably beyond Excel, would be with spreadsheets.
well, that and pivot tables, spreadsheets, and
Maybe in the SJD, yeah.
Yeah.
something like that.
which will be probably critical when we go to human resources in order to justify the position.
Correct.
Correct, the more things. Is there anything else, Lori, that you think we should be putting into here that, because you've been doing this for a period of time? That you can help guide us with?
Can I follow up?
Sure can. That'd be helpful. So based upon that conversation, I would bump the grade 19.
Followed in the AA2.
Yeah. And go to 2. Now, the other question. Please, Fred.
Just a question, I was
Yeah.
thinking about my amazement at the speed in which we're gonna be able to hire an executive director, and then asking myself, are we gonna have data available and fees coming in well prior to having an executive director on board? And if so, how is that gonna be managed, data and funds and just the operational part of the board?
Mhm.
Are you volunteering?
I'm not. I know my skill set, that's not that.
That's a really good question. We're sort of a chicken or the egg here, in some ways, catch 22. Because we talked about not having and hiring administrative assistant until we had the executive director come on board, but if it's gonna take that long to get somebody here, that becomes an issue too.
But I think that might be a role until we have an executive director. Seems like it'd be easier to borrow this person from an unfilled HHS spot. And then have this person managing our team of consultants that until we have an executive director is actually handling data management and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and given the prior conversation, I think that's gonna be critically important to make sure that we are operationally sound.
Correct.
Mhm.
Okay,
I agree. So my answer would be that we need to be thinking about who and what type of consultants, and are they already available internally? Either through the department or through. Actually, the departments, insurance might have some expertise.
Any thoughts on that, Jason?
I think there's a few parts to that. I think there's a few arms of authority that some of the data might be readily available, but I think some may not. The pricing data for the special Medicare Part B specialty drug classes, for example, that data comes in temporal mode, it's not just readily available. So with all three of those arms, we need 3 different time points for data availability. For your question, the answer that way. Sometimes that way.
So I think if we could find someone to act as a consultant, at least part-time. To get up and running to be critical at this point in time.
Right, but I would think the consultant would be task oriented rather than time oriented. In other words, we would need a consultant to do X, Y, and Z until we have an executive director who can actually fill that. Although Bill Marsh actually fits the job description
That's all
for
right.
an executive director.
I thought Tom Sherman was much better.
No bites.
That would be my thinking about what we might want to put on the agenda for the next meeting. As data comes in and what's the time frame of the data that's going to be coming in, and ask the departments for help with that. Then that would help steer us towards what do we need to meet our annual goals, and what kind of consultant would that be, and is it available internally?
I did have a conversation with Portal out of Harvard Medical School and Harvard University. They are working with the NASHP, and they have an agreement in place with them, so they have consultants down there we can tap into, which is part of what's in the budget now to help us, because one of the things I kept going back to is that if we're gonna set spending targets, which is what we're required to do, they have to be soundly vetted. It has to be a sound methodology that's been created. They have the manpower, the brain power, and the resources to develop that methodology. Then they could take our data and start taking the data and putting it against that methodology, and then give us, and then what they're asking for is that instead of then spending their time doing the data, the grunt work, as they call it, put grinding all the stuff and so forth, is there's a methodology that's been discussed, it's been approved by the board, and then let somebody take the data, grind it through the methodology. Then when it comes to the process, then go back and review the outcome of the process to be sure that the outcome met the methodology itself. So I'm in a conversation with Portal now, and hopefully next month we have a meeting, we can have them come to the board and talk about what they can do for us.
Ask a question.
Good.
You know, we have really incredible data management at both Dartmouth and at UNH through the College of Health and Human Services. Have you talked to either of them?
No,
Just keeping it in state,
no, I have not.
because they do incredible work. Amy Costello, I believe, is at UNH, and I can't remember who it is at Dartmouth. But they also have access to New Hampshire data already, rather than going to an out-of-state outside vendor.
So, UNH, probably is anyone down there I could talk to, or you can give me
Amy
the details?
Costello's right, yeah,
Amy's at UNH or
yes,
Dartmouth?
no. He's head of their Institute on Health Policy.
It's absolutely brilliant. in my-
Could you, do you have a contact with her, or someone I can reach her? You have
Yeah,
it?
let us know what,
Yeah.
I do. But Tom will be the person to contact you. Or you want to do the.
No, no,
Yeah,
either
yeah.
way.
Probably want to do that.
No.
If you're looking for a number, and he doesn't have it.
I'll send it to you.
No, it's probably Amy.Costello at NHIDU.
Right. It is also, we talked Dartmouth Atlas.
And Amy would know exactly who with Dartmouth, because she worked with Dartmouth.
All the time.
Yeah.
Do you mind talking with her?
You want me to?
Yeah.
Sure.
Please.
Yeah, I'll send you her contact just so you have it.
Yeah. Because a lot of the data analysis is probably gonna be done through a contract anyways. So we're gonna have to do this, even with an executive director on board, I don't expect them to be finding all the data. So we're gonna have to put that-
They actually already have a lot of this, and they know how to get it in New Hampshire too. They work with Chiz, I believe.
It's even better.
I think they do have it just there.
They have Chiz. So that basically I put down administrative 2. I guess I must have been thinking that direction anyways. I'll change the numbers because it's 75,000 won't be what it's gonna be. Actually. No, 75. Right, in-state travel, I put in a bogey of $1,500. I don't know how much that would cover. I don't believe we'll have a lot of travel. per se. There may be times in which the executive director has to go around to different agencies throughout the state, so I put in $1,500. An annual conference, again, that's back in networking, knowledge sharing, learning, and staying in contact with his peers or her peers. Subscriptions, yeah, it's going to, I don't, Medispan, that's probably gonna cost us at least $5,000 to $10,000. I don't know if we can use the state one. Do you have one over to the Department of Health? Oh,
I saw that in the budget. I thought that was pretty thoughtful.
okay. And then on contract services, what I put down at that point in time was a with UNH a portal. And we'll talk with Amy with UNH. I'm looking for about $50,000 to develop methodology. It's probably a one-time cost. It would be an annual cost, because once we get up the methodology and developed, then hopefully at that point in time, we have to do is just tweak it. But I think at that point in time, based upon what it is, but Amy maybe have a better shot at what it's gonna cost when you talk to her.
And also we may have, if it's gonna take us up to a year to find an executive director, we may want to redirect funds.
If they can do consulting work, that'd be even better. Absolutely.
Cover your startup costs with that.
And then at the end, when it comes through the process, is having somebody validate and vet the outcome. So someone's going to develop the path to do all the methodology, but then someone's going to put the data into whatever was created. And you can make mistakes and so forth, not always understand it. So when it comes through on the other side, and you got a report, someone's going to take the time to actually validate what's there, because when this hits the street, whatever its spending targets are, it's going to be scrutinized, analyzed by everybody under the sun. So I want to be sure whatever is out there has been fully vetted and tested. We can stand behind it.
So the only other one is just leaving a placeholder for our insurance policy.
For insurance policy, yeah.
The board and officer insurance. I would add board, officer, and what was the third one, the advisory council.
Advisory council. And it was the other one too about the data breach. Which would be different. So I could, and legal support, and I
Yeah,
don't,
that's it.
do we have to pay the AG's office, or should we pay the AG's office an MOU? Do we have it? I know in Maryland, some of the other states, what they do is they have a contract with their attorney general's office, so they don't hire an attorney themselves. They actually like to do administrative attached, they actually backfill.
That has not been mentioned to me by the AG's office at this point. I don't know if it's, I've always viewed it as a service that's provided by virtue of the
Okay.
Department of Justice, advising all state agencies. But it's something we can ask. I know when we were speaking with Attorney Phillips during the process, we originally had the DOJ in this MOU. And she was adamant about getting it out, so it had nothing to do with, because there's an MOU between, the DHHS and the board. So she never mentioned another MOU as belonging sort of what I'm saying.
So we could take the 10,000 for
Yeah.
legal support and put that into the insurance data breach. Redirect.
Or you
Okay.
could have them both
But
under one. It is all.
I mean, the DOJ gets a budget.
That's my understanding too. Yeah, I
Okay.
wouldn't see why you would need something separate with that.
okay,
They would just include that as part of their normal budget process.
and I just realized on my numbers on the Medispan subscription is 10,000 here, but I only put 5,000 up here, so it should be actually 10,000 there. That's my mistake. Administrative assistant, we bump it by the 5,000. On the thing, it's probably gonna bump it closer to about 80,000. So right now I'm looking at an additional 10,000, so it's 436,500 approximately. Which would make the overage of roughly 13,600, based upon what's there. So this is a simple budget, it's not a challenge. Challenge is gonna get through the GCEC and those type of things. Are you comfortable right now? Am I missing anything? And the MOU for Department of Health Human Services, I talked to Nathan White, he said, put it $50,000 and that should cover it.
I would just bump the contract services number up out of surplus
Okay,
and not show a surplus. That's just one thought. Because contract services are very expensive.
I agree with that, plus you can always contract for something else.
So how much would you want to bump up to?
Whatever the surplus is.
13,600.
So then we have zero.
So the balance, the bottom
Income
comes out
minus
at zero.
expenses.
So 100, if we make it to this 15,000, so we make it roughly 140,000. Thereabouts, okay, just make it down to zero, gotcha, makes sense.
Question on, are we on the income side yet, or the revenue side?
This.
Okay.
Is there any other expenses in here, like, think of the MOU with. Department of Health and Human Services, Nathan put in 50,000 at this point in time. I'm sure as he goes through the department budget, it's gonna be
He said that's a ballpark.
ballpark, just the. Of guys. Is there anything else that you can think of in here? Because the MOU with the department includes the office space, telephones, computers, I mean, all the operational details. All right. Now, on to the revenue side. So I went back and looked at, do you have copies? Did you bring copies?
Of the,
No, on the other one, the form I sent. Did you get a chance to get copies of that? Right there in front of you. Is that it? Yeah,
Yeah, I handed them out.
we handed them out, okay. So this is based upon last year, what we did was we went into a data base and we pulled out, and this, the database we used was courtesy of the Medicaid department. I found out that Centers of Medicaid and Medicare Services, CMS, actually has a list of all the manufacturers. So you have what's called a labelage list. I went through and looked at all the labels list, pared it down, some are duplicates and so forth, et cetera. And based upon that and going through Medicaid, looking for people actually do business in the state of New Hampshire, because that's who we can assess fees to is somebody working in New Hampshire. What I came up with was this simple spreadsheet. If you want to see the full Excel spreadsheet, you can, but it's just basically what it comes down to. So I sorted it in a pivot table by manufacturers, 442 manufacturers, and they all have a separate tax ID number, because that's kind of what's focused on. They have the same tax ID number. It could be a different, same organization with different doing business as. Manufacturer, wholesaler, distributors, benefit, pharmacy benefit managers. There's one in there as a benefit manager and wholesaler distributor, which I couldn't understand, but it's in there. And wholesale distributors. So those are the ones that we have currently. If you go back and look at the rules that we created. In the rules, if you go back into. Give you an update on the rules, by the way, at the same time. Under the rules. What we approved and what Jelcar approved. Was that we have for this class, there's two classes, people who do claim processing only. It's $100 to $200. Anybody who does PVM work, wholesaler, manufacturers and so forth, it's between 500 and 1,000. So there's a range in there to play with. So what I said at that point in time is we have a budget based upon the expenses of $450,000. In order to hit that number on the revenue side, we'd have to come up with about $700 on these individuals on an annual basis.
On all of these 600.
Yes, 643.
so that did not take into account the at least $100 assessment. So did you want to include that revenue in here?
I would, but I don't have a way to measure it yet.
Okay.
I don't know
so-
who
But we
only
should
does
have like a placeholder understanding
Yeah.
that.
$100.
That was, this what happened to me. 126 BB8,
Correct.
1C, 1 through 3. Those are health insurance carriers, HMOs, third-party administrators, health carriers providing only administrative. So the bottom line, though, was that I thought, if we say $100 for each of them, then that will decrease this by somewhat.
That's somewhat correct.
The other way to do it is to try to make it a little bit more fair between the two different assessments. But I think we should have a placeholder so
Yeah.
so we don't forget that we have this unknown revenue coming in. That would represent those,
Otherwise, we'll exceed 125% of expenses.
Yeah.
we may,
We may.
but I
So,
think we should lower what we're hitting the manufacturers by at least $100 per.
is there in the insurance department, is there any kind of a database about these HMOs and things of that nature that we can extract?
Yeah, and it shows data that there. Those identifiers in the market category, whether they're with ASOs or administrators only,
You have it, and it's just,
yeah, so market category is stratified. And then
can I work with you, Jason, on that? Can I work? That's a good point. We can go back and look at that, and whatever we have, we can reduce it on the other side.
Yeah, and I think probably I would just put a line item on your annual budget, this thing.
Yep.
That recognizes that you will have. Those entities being entered in, which will decrease.
We'll add that to the budgets. So that's how I came up with the revenue side of the equation. Is there any
Can I ask
more?
you a question?
Sure.
Again, going back to my cart and horse concern. I'm thinking about the expectation of those that give us fees and assess fees. In the time of that. And developing a budget, which in other boards, it's a management issue, not a board issue, to come up with these numbers. How are we gonna satisfy the manufacturers and the PDMs with information that they will expect once they give us a fee? And the timing of that,
In terms of what is it being used for?
used for in data that we have gathered and acted upon, et cetera, they're gonna, I would imagine they're gonna want some. They have an expectation of what we may be able to give them once they start paying fees and assessed fees. No, is that not true?
I think, no, not, it won't go back to them per se directly that way, but it will come back to us helping them understand the spending targets.
Right, but I'm just trying to understand mechanically how we're gonna be able to answer any questions that they may have about. The targets that we generate and, the data that we collect, that sort of thing, and interpretation and action upon.
I just have a thought, and that's that we can't move forward with this without the revenue being there. But I think there would be an expectation that by the end of what would be fiscal year
Mhm.
23,
24.
23. and that's
23,
this June.
this
30.
June, so 24, we would be meeting our statutory requirements, but we have to have funding to be able to do that.
Sure.
And it's whether we use consultants or actually have made our hires by then. That's on us.
So we'll be clear with those that pay fees about when they'll see action upon their data and that sort of thing. Okay.
A clarification on, there's several kinds of information that we might be able to propagate. And we're not talking about collecting new Medicare, Medicaid, or commercial aid. That process is already ongoing. That's just. What we will and started to do is to report those prescriptions with high expenditures, high cost per day, high growth rate, kinds of things. That it could happen pretty quickly, actually. The methodology that's behind are setting what the goals are, what the limits are supposed to be, or targets on price and expenditure increases will take, I would say, at least a year, before we start to be able to. We're talking about taking data, analyzing it, coming up with a methodology, checking the methodology, and then setting targets. So it'll be, I would say, 2 years at least before targets get set, but in the interim, we can talk about, as we started to talk about what the most expensive drugs are, both in CHIS general, and one of the issues that's been raised is the paid by public payers, and another issue that includes the medical benefit component. That kind of stuff can, I think, get started reasonably quickly.
Once we have a contract in place, yes. Because someone's gotta pump out the work. I totally agree with you. I think the timing of it's gonna be dependent greatly upon what we have for resources.
But I just want to add that your point is really well taken, which is when people start paying fees, they expect
Yeah.
some results, and so the burden will be on us to make sure that as quickly as possible, we are generating results that have meaning.
Correct. Which goes back to my,
Thank you for saying so eloquently that I did not. So.
no, and that's also one of the things that came up, if you look at with Gelcart also brought that up, because one of the things they said, and this is back to the constitutionality, is that they're asking about, what's the benefit to the people paying the fee? And I think that's back to the same thing, we have to identify what that benefit's going to be. And I think you're working with the AG's office on that as well, so we can respond back to Gelcart.
Yes.
And it's not just our board, by the way, this is broader than
Yes,
us.
I understand this is broader, but we seem to unfortunately have touched it up or raised the issue. Yes, I'm working with the AG's office on that, and we will be prepping a response for the February 17th jail car. Is what we're looking at.
So in saying on the revenue side, there's a couple of options. We're hopefully, if you look at the, there's another thing in here called the invoice, and somebody told me this, Sherman, you want to see an invoice that was going out? So I did get it, yeah. So that's just, it's relatively simple invoice.
And vendors can be anybody we're billing, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So just, it was a matter of the name and so forth, and I'm sure you'll dress it up accordingly and all the stuff that goes with it.
Yes, Mary Police is the one that sent this to me. She's the deputy CFO, and she indicated that this is a pretty bare bones example, but this is pretty much what we do.
Yeah, it's not. So. Oh,
Question from Heidi.
sorry.
Sorry, thank you for letting me interrupt. I just wanted to note on this particular item, I noticed if you scroll down, the phone number doesn't have an area code. And so this might be going to people who are answering. 603 might be mobile.
Good. Catch. So in regards to the, there's a couple things involved. One is gonna be hiring consultants. That's gonna be hopefully sooner than later. Hiring executive director, maybe later than sooner. Along with the other staff support and so forth. So I would look at it and saying what we probably have to cover more than anything else is going to be the contract services and the MOU with the HHS. That's pretty quick. That's going to get built into the budget. Then the question is going to be, what do you want to do about revenue? Because we can send out an invoice. I would say back to the question is, this time probably prorate it and do it for 6 months. And with an understanding as we're up and running, we're starting to get it going. We recognize that we haven't been active for the first 6 months of this year, and we're prorating the bill accordingly. To show good nature, if you will, good faith. Thank you.
I'm the wordsmith today.
Thank you. I'll keep you in mind.
Well, since our expenses will be prorated as well.
Correct.
Will this come with a narrative as well of some sort?
It'll come hopefully with a letter.
Okay.
And also there's that little box description.
I saw that. It's a very small box.
Small.
Very small font.
Yeah, that's not meant to be a much more than this
Yeah.
very brief description.
Okay,
So there's gonna be two things that are gonna go out. Number one is that at this point in time, it's supposed to be renewing and re-registering with the board on an annual basis. That happens in January. Okay, so what we'll have to do is send out a notice to them again, like we did last time, is that you're required to register with the board, just like you do with the insurance departments. And at that point in time, remind them of their legal obligation to register with the board.
And let's make sure there's a link on that reminder of where they register, because
Yeah.
when we first started, it was my email. And that no longer exists, so, yeah, it created a little stir. So let's just make sure there's
could
a
use-
link where they can.
You could
actually
use your
file.
home email now.
It's my personal. Where's that insurance?
So work on that this month and start working on that list, so we get those out to people. Just do things. One is they have to register with the board, and also they have to supply to the board any price increases that went above whatever the statute requires. But
I've had several questions about this already in my email. From the
Why isn't
people.
Senator Sherman responding? Is that the-
No, no, they're just asking what they should be doing this year. They want to make sure they're compliant. I have not responded.
Is it-
Yeah, there's a certain baseline level of confusion, I think, in the manufacturer side on the reporting requirements to this board and the pharmacy board, 318, 67, 68. I think anything we can do to make that language clearer.
That's a good point.
Understand the distinction. But they have that reporting requirement, I guess, or albeit redundant to both agencies.
Yeah, talking about the high cost drugs
Yeah.
specifically, yes.
We should, it's two separate notices, right? They go out, so we should make clear who we are, not who we are, but why this notice is going out in the statute that it's attached.
Right.
Yeah.
The
So what-
statute
So that they
says-
understand this is, you could even put in there, this is not. This does not fulfill the requirement for the other
RSA,
one.
Yes.
Put
What is
that on
that?
ours.
Reference
Somehow make them
318.
yeah, it'd help. I think it would help. And it's probably the same thing. You want us to put in the letter, if you have questions about 318. Who to contact or not?
The way you handled it last time, that language seemed to work.
Okay,
And I think that making it clear to others too, because not all manufacturers seem to be aware of the distinction. It's not possible to have the one registration process serve both functions.
all right now. It would be a goal for the future, but I think the registration that we're looking for, let me ask you back up before I say that. Are the people we're looking for to register with this board the same as looking for to register with?
Well, there's one reporting parameter, it's the specialty drugs that exceed the
Right.
specialty drug cost threshold. That's the same criteria to report to the insurance department, to use high cost prescription drugs. And it's really the same reporting requirement. When I came from academia, I had the same question. Why can't they just report to the same state, right? Now I know otherwise, so I mean,
So that's the high cost drug, right?
yeah, but it's the same mechanistic definition.
But that only applies to manufacturers. Do you capture PBMs and do you capture
No,
the,
it's just manufacturers.
just manufacturers?
Where-
With one
where is that?
contingency.
I would keep it separate
Yeah.
for now, and then maybe
blended?
once
Yeah.
we've got it. Then we could try to streamline it. Not that I believe in redundancy, but I do think that clarity
That help.
is gonna be really important.
The other thing, which also was advised by Andrew York, down to Maryland, he said, stay away from a fee that is comparable to the pharmacy board, because it gets very confusing inside of the manufacturers. And I found out the pharmacy board charges $500 a year for their permit. So he said, whatever you do, stay away from $500. Don't make it 501, make it 502, anything, but you stay with 500, you're gonna cause more confusion internally within the company. I think it will be above $500, but he just advised us that when these things go out, they do cause confusion. Because they'll call you up and say, we already paid it. So right now, as far as are we okay with sending out the invoice for half the year? Half the assessment? I don't have the $100 range here, so do you want to hold up until we have that number, or do you want to send something out now and then adjust it in subsequent in May?
How long will it take you to get that number?
No, looking for hey, Jason. How long would it take? How long do you think out of the chiz we can get the list of the 100?
I have to go back and talk to our commissioner first. I want to be sensitive to, you have a service agreement with the HHS.
Yeah.
I just want to be sensitive to that and understand the roles and responsibilities given that. So I do have to talk to our commissioner, but I mean, it's easily accessible information. I think Andrew and Mary could get that easily as well. I'm happy to help, but I just want to make sure that it's not in breach of the existing service agreement that we already have.
Could we just get a number?
Yeah.
If we got a number, then we would be able to know
Okay.
how much to decrease this fee by.
You could write the budget.
Right.
Then we could write the budget. So pending releasing specific names and otherwise to us.
Yeah, I'm happy to help.
No, I know, I
I know,
was
I know.
wondering how fast we could get it, because then we could get the bills out.
I
Before
think
February.
my nickname is Jason Jason. I mean, quickly, I want to make sure. Into trouble.
You want to go with that speed bump, right?
I don't want to reach on other operational
Yeah.
as well.
How soon can you get back to me?
Later today.
Okay,
That is racing.
that's basic. Okay, thank you, Rachel. Right, and I'll just modify it accordingly. And then at the same time, which would be nice about this is of the 643 other ones, even though we sent an invoice out, doesn't mean all of them are gonna get paid. So that's the other downside. We'll have a better way of building the database and find out at that point in time how accurate we are with our database and how prompt people are reimbursing the board. All right, anything more questions at this point in time? We're gonna send it out for 6 months, correct? We're all set with that, kind of a. And we're gonna go with, sorry,
A dumb question, on the 640, I presume there are a variety of sale volumes or revenues associated from very high multi-million dollars. What I worry about is, how many of those 640 have sales in New Hampshire that are less than $700?
That's a good question. I understand your sensitivity. I don't disagree with it. Question is, I don't know where we find the data. How we could ask them is what the sales in New Hampshire are as part of the registration process. And then we could modify future invoices.
It still has to be more than 500.
So that's be 500.
If they're registered or if they're doing sales in New Hampshire. So I think it's kind of a quagmire you might get into if you trying to prorate based on sales in New Hampshire.
I did talk to Andrew down to Maryland. They talked about the same thing and it became that issue was how do you validate it?
Right.
What they did, which is why I put the tax ID numbers, is they said if they had somebody had same tax ID number doing business with different names, they focus on a tax ID number to minimize people who had
Right.
the same tax ID number but had multiple, to avoid that. Right? So do we need a motion on the floor then to approve at least sending out an invoice? And I'll make the adjustments accordingly, but right now the target I have on the budget is 140,000 for contract services, 25,000 half a year for the HHS. And I think at that point in time, that's all we have, is that right?
So can I just
Sure, please.
clarify what the motion would be?
Yeah.
The motion would be a 6-month prorated invoice for, as outlined in your budget, diminished by the number that would go for at the $100 level. Is that correct? I don't know if that's
Well,
the right way to
no.
say it, but
So what I'm concerned about, if we don't put money in for the, which I didn't do, put the money in for the executive director administrative assistant. Some of the other things, with the understanding that they may not occur until July, but if it happens in May, we won't have the funds there to do it.
no, I'm not saying not to do it. I'm just saying that we would do it as you've outlined. But the assessment would be decreased as we talked about.
The assessment of the ones I'm currently here would be
Right, would
decreased, yes,
decrease
correct,
by prorating for 6 months.
correct.
And 2, once we know the number of people being assessed or entities being assessed at the $100 level, we would subtract, we'd prorate that also. So those 2 factors would change this number.
Correct, so we're basically at this point in time, the total expenses remains at 436,000, actually 400. So the expenses for the year. But we're gonna take 450,000 divided by 2, which would be 225,000. Take the expenses and the same thing would be 450,000 expenses, make them basically match each other, but that will be prorated again. By 6 months, so it'll be 225,000, so the top and the bottom will match.
Right.
The amount of assessment fees on the top, the $700 will be adjusted based upon the number of people that we have that are at $100.
Right.
We all set?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'll make that motion,
thank you.
however you just said it.
Okay, it's on a Zoom, if I go back and see it. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Let's try that. Now, as far as the cost benefit, I talked to Gelcar, we talked about that briefly. They wanted to come back. We'll go to Gelcar in February 17th.
Yeah.
They were teeing up. And what basically the concern Gelcar had, it was raised, was that if you have, there's a tax and a fee. And I'm gonna get into some legal quagmire here, so when I get in too thick, either you or Todd, if you can help me out here. So understanding that within the constitutionality, if you have a tax, that goes through the legislative process. If you have a fee, it can be outside of it, such as a license, driver's fee, license for practicing as a physician, as an attorney, and so forth. There's fees you pay. Now, what the challenge has been is the fact in saying is that when you pay a fee, you get something back. Which sort of led into what you're saying before, Representative Murphy. From the manufacturer's point of view, I gave you $500. What's in it for me? And that's what we're going to talk about with the Attorney General's office. I think part of it is going to be doing business from New Hampshire, number one. Because that's a requirement, but that's kind of where the challenge is coming from. And that's what we have to answer back to Gelcar. And it's not just our boards, again, other boards, because I also found out that the I believe the insurance department, you run off fees. Same thing, what do they get out of it? Doing business in New Hampshire. That's fundamentally what it comes down to. When you think about utilities, the utility commission, they pay fees. What do? They get regulated, but they also can do business in New Hampshire. So the question comes down to is, how do we satisfy that requirement? What's the benefit to them? Fundamental, a lot of times comes down to the ability to do business in New Hampshire, but that's up to the Attorney General's office.
I was just thinking one other benefit, and I don't, just throwing it out, but they set their fees based, I think the New York Times recently did a piece on how they set the structure for new drugs coming out. They have no idea what the impact is, what the real impact is, and we're going to tell them what the real impact is in
Right.
New Hampshire. So I think that's a benefit. What is the real studied impact, not by specific drug, but across drugs in a publicly disclosable way, which is going to be in our report. What is the real impact on the consumer?
And one of the other things is you talk about this, which I wasn't thinking about, because it's part of when we do our targets. Is in the statute is looking if there's a medical cost savings. That is part of the target as well. So if you have a drug that comes to the market, it costs $10,000, but it reduces your medical side of the equation by 20,000. It's a very good thing. So a lot of times it's back to comments with the analysis that we're doing, and hopefully with Amy down to UNH. Is showing them that there's some data that they can use in their own internal.
Yeah, I would say what they're getting is they're getting data aggregation that they could not access otherwise, because it would be probably a violation of antitrust.
Correct.
But it's data aggregation and analysis that's may be useful, not just in New Hampshire, but across the country.
Right, and they could repackage that. I'm sorry.
No.
They could repackage that and do something else with it, for as far as their business goes, right? I mean, so it's more nuanced than just, are you paying a fee so you can get into the park, right? It's a lot more nuanced than that.
It's one of the things I think we'd like to do, because I would like to do with the board support, of course. Is that when we talk about some of the spending targets, is also talking to some of the people within the manufacturing community as well, and talking to them again, the same thing as the stakeholders. Is pull people together and have these conversations, and back to the same thing, the benefit is having them part of those conversations.
And if you go back to many of the corporations that we're working with, and they have a corporate mission statement, we're actually helping build their mission statement. It's not, we're not in, I won't say any names, but say somebody doing a biologic. Their mission statement is not to make as much profit as possible from the poor sucker consumer. Their mission statement has much more to do with a loftier goal of the health of America and health. And that's really the benefit that we'll
Provide.
that's one of the ways that we're providing a benefit is to meet their mission statement.
That's a good point.
And we're measuring the public good.
Follow good, right?
It's like a measurement of an externality, a positive externality.
All right. On to next meetings. Do you want to try to schedule? Historically, you've done this sort of ad hoc. Do you want to try to schedule it more frequently or on a more scheduled basis? Like once a month, once a quarter? Help me understand. Do we have a lot of work still ahead of us? I would. Yes, we didn't say we still have some work to be done.
We split that in two and say the first 6 months, given the unpredictability of when we meet, could be done on an ad hoc monthly basis, but then develop a schedule for the second half of the year on a more regular basis. Would you rather have one fits up? Yeah, I get it.
And I'm in the same boat you are.
Yeah.
Reps Murphy. But I think we had to start getting into more of a routine. I know Senator, well, it's gonna be a challenge as well in the Senate. But if we have at least some dates, if we can't meet them all, we can try to at least get most of them.
Your session days are
Thursdays.
Thursdays.
That's
And
the
then
only
you've
day.
got Caucus on Wednesdays. Do you have, other than committees, do you have anything Tuesday, Wednesday mornings?
No,
I don't have a Tuesday or Wednesday morning committee.
about Tuesdays,
Thursdays we're in session.
about Tuesday.
She-
Tuesday and Wednesday, you said?
What about, who else?
But I don't know that he'll be reappointed even as an alternate.
You're not up for reappointment?
I'm not,
No.
I'm like on this forever.
5 years.
Really?
Yeah, 5 years.
5 years.
Also,
Oh.
5 years.
I did not know that.
Welcome to the board. It's the
Okay,
fine print. It was in a really tiny
That's
font.
okay,
So you're
Well, that's
stuck with this.
well, that's good.
And I talked to Sharon about the 3 or 4 year thing.
I mean, I don't know if she's gonna even have any availability.
Well, she is,
She's the Senate appointee.
well, so am I. So, but even though I'm not in the Senate, because these aren't legislative appointments, so
You keep
we
it,
have a term.
okay,
So I just have to work out with her whether I'm 3 or 4. It's in since she
Right.
could reappoint herself if she wanted to, I'd rather she were 3 and I were 4. But the bottom line is on meetings, if we could pick a morning when the 3 of you, is it just the 3 of you? And I don't think Sharon's probably gonna.
I can't imagine she's gonna.
Sure,
run,
yeah.
but
They sent out a tentative schedule. It looks like, as before, Tuesday to Thursday is possibilities. So,
The Thursday is session.
right, but they were talking about, I've got the calendar and they,
I'm an idiot. I'm free Wednesday mornings. I'm free Monday and Tuesday.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
I'm free Monday morning.
what about Monday? mornings?
Mondays, Mondays works better for me.
Yeah, HHS usually meets on Tuesday.
Right,
Yeah.
that's, they were told, so. So Monday morning would be a reasonable time. 6:30 or 7.
You wanna shoot for,
10 o'clock.
what, you're not a surgeon by any chance, are you?
When we get up.
What time you wanna shoot for?
10.
10, that's fine, 10 or 12.
The one caution, if I may, for Monday mornings, we do have MCAC in here on, I think, the second Monday of every month.
So why don't we do the first Monday of every month?
So the,
So we missed that already.
No, but I mean, starting in February.
Right.
that'd be in the 6th.
Mm.
I can't do the 6th,
6th of March too.
no, I can't do that, because although, someone else can chair.
Yeah, you're pretty important.
I'll be out of the country. Could do it. The week before on the 27th. So if you want to do it the last Monday on the 30th, and then May 27th. So you do it the last Friday of the month, does that work?
The month you're in now?
I won't be here the last Monday of January.
Okay,
Oh, yes, I will. The 30th,
yeah,
I could do that.
I could do
on
that.
30, and then also on 27.
I'd have to be virtual for February, March, May.
February 27th.
Yeah,
The Senate will be on break.
I'll be in
And
California.
it is the houses too. They,
The
that's
House
the
is
week.
gonna take a break.
Yes, that's the week they noted that
Okay.
everybody's gonna be away.
So why don't we keep it the first Monday,
All right,
and then you're gonna be out of the country?
yep, on the March.
March 6th.
Well, you're gonna skip a March meeting.
Skip March, yep. And go back in April 3rd, in April 3rd,
So it'll be February 6th,
April 3rd. May 1st. And June 5th,
10 to 12.
yeah, 10 to 12.
And just say that in April, well, probably more like May. I don't know what the Senate Finance Committee is, when he's gonna do.
Okay,
But I think crossover is April
Yes.
6th or something.
Yeah. so May, sorry,
So
February.
I may not be able
Make it.
to make a Monday meeting.
So right now we have February 6th, April 3rd, May 1st, and June 5th. Right now. And we,
If we need one in March, we can decide that in February and
Yeah.
find the timing. Albeit March is a bad month for you guys.
yeah, it's
It's crazy.
crazy.
Crossover.
The
would be
Senate
good
is
step.
crazy.
It
April
just,
6th, right.
March is a horrible time because all the bills are little,
Well,
it's insane. But that's legislative life. All right, now the other thing on the advisory council, Tom, you want to speak to that?
Oh, yeah, I just thought if we are starting to ramp up, we might want to send a notice to ask people whether they intend to participate or whether they want to appoint somebody. Some of these appointments take a while.
Yeah. Good point.
I think there's 2 gubernatorial appointments. There's, I can't remember, I reviewed it this morning, but
And
Just-
the other thing we have to be thinking about too is there in the statute 2 alternates for each one. So it's 2 alternates in the governor's appointments, 2 alternates for the House and 2 alternates for the Senate.
right,
the
so we
attorney
don't know
general.
which ones still have some openings, right?
Correct. But right now, right now, all the alternates have been filled,
Oh,
but we added alternates to in the statute. We only had 1 alternate for each one of the 3.
right, so there's some open
Correct.
alternates.
So I don't know whether we want to, at this point in time, expand on those or.
I would.
Yeah. Okay. So we work on a letter to get it out to the respective agencies and so forth, at least at that point in
On
time,
the
start thinking
advisory
about
council,
advisory council,
right.
about thinking about who they would appoint. Either themselves, or somebody else, we'll get that done. All right.
You may want a little explanation what PDAB
That's-
is. And what the role of the advisory council is
With the statute attached to it.
with the statute.
Statute attached to it. That's what I'm gonna say, attached.
We
Yeah.
can get a brochure going.
Yeah. The public comments, anybody else?
Yeah, so, again, Heidi Kroll with Gallagher, Callahan, and Gartrell for AHIP, and I just wanted to kind of share with all of the board members the, email correspondence that I think you and I and Dr. Woodward and then well, to make it on an email, after your last meeting, which I think was must have been late November, because that correspondence was in that time frame. But the kind of question or comment that AHIP had simply raised was with respect to the report that's now posted on your website. And the issue really was to just be very clear that the data that was culled from the CHIS database focused on the pharmacy benefit side only and not the medical benefit side, even though the data is available in the CHIS database on the medical side. And as you know, that remains very important piece of the data from AHIP's perspective to look at. And so right now, really, the report is just a snapshot of half of the picture and not the full picture. And as an example, and what I put into the email to you, in a federal HHS report, which was released in September, it found, so it looked at all drugs on both sides, and it found that there were 2 drugs, Tecardis and Yescarta, were the top 2 drugs with the largest dollar amount increases in 2022. Both increased by $25,000 per treatment, from going up from $399,000 up to $424,000. And so those are the types of drugs that are very expensive, and that doesn't even reflect provider or hospital markups in the buy and bill model, that they buy the drug and then bill the insurance company. And so I think it's really, really important that going forward, this board focus on both sides of the equation. Because right now, reading this report, I mean, I know that there's a footnote, but it kind of gets lost in the footnote. From the public's reading this, they're not getting the full picture. So that was a priority for AHIP and the work that this board does.
I totally agree. I mean, one of the things we talked about before is, looking at drug spend. And trying to figure out how to be sure we have a database that we support it and understand how to analyze it. And that's hopefully the next iteration of it. We talked about going down this here and how do we get there?
We did put in that
Disclaimer,
disclaimer,
that's
was it?
footnote.
It's a footnote.
And there was something in the introductory text
Yes.
to that chapter about the chits that we were only using, there was a sentence in there, all. The point's well taken. but I
Yeah.
agree.
Is there any other? Comments for anybody on the website that wants to make a comment? Is there anyone out in the World Wide Web that wants to make a comment? No, I guess not. Silence. Move to adjourn. Undebatable motion to adjourn. For those who want to debate it. Can stay.
Great.